See, I think we're all to blame to some extent for this, or most of us, because we get sick and we've got a schedule, work schedule, or social schedule. We want the next day, we want to feel better. So we take a pill, we feel better, and we ignore this fact that the body, as you're suggesting, or you're saying, has to go through a process of healing.
Well, the classic one is dancers. I worked in a clinic, Wimpole Street, near Harley Street, where I was working with an acupuncturist who actually treated mainly dancers. And the dancers would take painkillers and anti-inflammatories because, of course, it was their livelihood. And they had to get on the stage and perform. And it would end up crippling them. Because what the painkillers and anti-inflammatories were doing was actually suppressing the actual process going on. So they'd work through the inflammation and pain. The inflammation and pain was saying, don't move that joint, rest it. But because they were suppressing those messages, they'd work through it, which great, they carried on with their career, where they would have been replaced with somebody else. So it had a use, but at the expense of destroying the joint.
And it's the same with professional footballers 10, 20 years ago, not so much now, where they're giving high doses of cortisone to keep them playing, and then, of course, they end up as cripples.
I mean, cortisone in the joint, it's fine, but if you give repeated or higher doses, it actually degrades the joint. And then it comes to a point where the joint is past the point of cure. So again, that's misuse rather than appropriate use.
So what can you do then to help somebody with autoimmune disease with Chinese medicine?
Well, in our pharmacopoeia, in the last few decades, there's a whole section of herbs that have been recognized as specific to deal with allergies and autoimmune conditions, which I use. And I spent some time in China, in Chengdu, China, Sichuan province, with Professor Zheng. Learning. He was actually a Western doctor to start with, because he came from a family of Western doctors, and Western medicine has been in China for quite a long time, 100 years. And he became then a medical researcher as part of being Western doctor as well. And one of his projects was to research Chinese herbal medicine in the clinic. He was so fascinated and impressed by it, whereas before he didn't take that much interest in it. He trained to become a Chinese herbalist. And now he still practices as a Chinese herbalist and also works in the lab. And he's moved his research more over to particular Chinese herbs and how they affect the immune system. And so, as I say, I spent some time in China learning from him and his method of treatment.
And this helps to put the immune system back in balance.
Well, he said at the moment there's plenty of evidence from the clinic and from his researching that we can actually calm the immune system down, not suppress it, but harmonize it, calm it down. But there's still no evidence we can actually switch it off. Because again, there's another idea that immune system problems, allergies, autoimmune problems are genetic, that you get them from your parents. And therefore, perhaps with some sort of genetic engineering in the future, we could actually switch it, turn it off.
But isn't that more to do with a potential weakness as opposed to necessarily a concrete problem?
Well, the thing is autoimmune conditions or allergies a weakness? Certainly in traditional Chinese medicine, they say it's a weakness. And the reason they say it's a weakness is they call the immune system Wei Qi. And Wei Qi is a defensive energy, as indeed the immune system is, and it can always be, it can never be excess, it can only be deficient. Therefore, they have no concept of treating an excess of immune energy, only supporting the deficiency. Whereas Western medicine has the concept of, if there's, as they see it as an inflammation, typical symptoms of autoimmune or allergies are quite full, hot inflammation, they actually suppress it and contain it. But by doing that, then you deplete the immune system. So, for instance, if you have an autoimmune condition, for instance, lupus, and you suppress it with high dose of steroids, the inflammation reduces and brings the patient a lot of relief. But at the same time, because you're suppressing the immune system, you leave them open to viral attacks, bacterial invasion, fungal invasion, so you make them quite weak. If you harmonize the immune system, you calm it down, but at the same time you strengthen it.
Right.
So you calm the immune system down, so again you bring down the symptoms, but at the same time, because you support the immune system, they're still strong in terms of defense.
So Ken, you were telling me earlier before we started that you found there's a link between autoimmune disease and cancer?
There's possibly a link. As I said before, with autoimmune diseases and allergies, 1 in 3 people in Europe, UK, America, have autoimmune diseases and allergies.
1 in 3 people?
1 in 3 people.
Have autoimmune disease?
Autoimmune or allergies.
Well, that's an extraordinarily high figure, isn't it?
Well, it's getting more and more. It's increasing. And as I said before, it's only since the 1930s did it begin. It was only since the 1950s did it really take off.
Right.
And also 1 in 3 people have cancer or will get cancer. And the prediction is by 2020 it'll be everybody. So...
Hang on. In 12 years, we're all going to get cancer?
Oh, is that 12 years' time? Yes. Well, it depends if the curve...
Really?
Yeah.
Good heavens. Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So at the moment it's 1 in 3. So there's a correlation there. Both conditions are in the modern world. I mean, they've been around. Cancer been around longer than allergies and autoimmune. I mean, the first book in China written on the treatment of tumors and cancer using Chinese herbal medicine was 600 AD, around 600 AD. So cancer has been around, but it was a rare condition. We know it's not rare now. We all know of every relatives, friends, etc., being struck down with it, and we're all in some worry ourselves whether we'll be next to it. But to me, there's a correlation. Both of them in the last 50 years have gone through the roof. Interesting, I had breakfast in Hong Kong back in 1999 with a Professor Gove, and he's a New York professor. And it was an accidental breakfast because it was organized by a director of a Chinese herb company that sent me to China to look at quality control in various factories. And he arranged this breakfast, and I didn't know why I was having breakfast with this professor. And he started explaining his work to me. And he has, for the last 40 years, been researching the nuclear industry in America. And he actually constructed a blood test where he could actually predict a worker would get cancer in 70 months down the line through his blood tests. And he found that people in the nuclear industry exposed to radiation would absorb, and it would have a half-life where a certain amount of radiation would actually produce a graph. So it would start at this level, and then the graph would swing, an exponential curve. So he would plot that if they were this much along the graph, they would have to have so many months out of the industry for the curve to reduce again. If they didn't, the curve would go up. And at this point, he could predict that then they would produce cancer, tumors, wherever. But obviously, being scientific trial, he had to have people outside of the industry and do blood tests with them as a comparison. And he actually found that a lot of people in his group who are outside of the nuclear industry showed a similar curve. Not everybody, but some people showed a similar curve. So he looked at those particular individuals in more detail to find out why, because that's not supposed to be happening, and it was messing up his other results. And he found that those particular individuals were more exposed to chemicals than the groups that didn't have those curves. And he surmised that combinations of toxic chemicals could actually have the same effect as radiation in producing cancers. And we know that as well. Chemotherapy, radiotherapy may actually clear up a cancer in one particular area, but it can actually lead to producing cancers again in other areas because of their toxic nature. So in a sense that wasn't a surprise, but he was surprised that people out there in the world being exposed to a toxic soup of chemicals could produce the same sort of results as people exposed to radiation. And it's true enough. I mean, in the modern world, where now anything between 3,000 to 5,000 chemicals we're exposed to on a daily basis. And you and I sitting here, and people up there working the camera, we'll all have traces of DDT in our blood, even though it was banned in the 60s, because it's still around.
And our body has to try and deal with that. And presumably what you're saying is years ago, that wasn't a factor. So our body has to learn a new way of dealing with a new substance.